Welcome to Forgotten Fronts, Warfare Across the Ages. I'm your host, and here we explore the battles, leaders, and strategies that shaped our world. From ancient empires to modern conflict, we break down how warfare forged power, redrew borders, and changed history. Welcome to the front lines. Welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Fronts. Today we're talking about Cannae. And I need to be honest with you, this one unsettled me more than I had expected it to. Because when people talk about Cannae, they usually talk about it like it's a flex. Like it's a masterpiece, and like it's the cleanest tactical victory in ancient history. You see the diagrams, the curved line, the arrows wrapping around from both sides. It almost looks elegant on paper. But when you sit with it, and when you slow it down, it stops looking elegant. It starts feeling claustrophobic. And I think that's what hooked me, because Cannae isn't just about Hannibal outsmarting Rome. It's about Rome being so confident that they couldn't see the shape changing around them. And that kind of confidence feels very, very human. By the time Rome reaches Cannae, they've already been embarrassed. They were crushed at the Trebia River, they were ambushed at Lake Trasimene, and the entire Roman armies were destroyed on Roman soil. That is utterly humiliating. And when someone humiliates you, especially when you're used to winning, your instinct isn't always to slow down. Sometimes your instinct is to go bigger, to prove something, to double down. And that's what Rome did. They don't show up to Cannae scared. They show up angry. They show up determined. They show up with one of the largest armies they've ever assembled. Because in their mind, this isn't risky. This is corrective. I keep thinking about that because confidence, when it's backed by years of success, doesn't feel like arrogance. It feels like truth. Rome believed in the system. Rome believed in discipline. And Rome believed in tightly packed infantry pushing forward as one solid mass. They believed that if they applied enough pressure long enough, nothing could stand in front of them. That wasn't just strategy, that was identity. And that's why Cannae hits so hard, because Hannibal doesn't beat Rome by overpowering them. He beats Rome by letting them be exactly who they already are. That is the truly terrifying part. Cannae only works if Rome behaves predictably. It only works if they see a bulging center and think, that's where we punch. It only works if they trust momentum more than they question it. And they do. They push and they compress and they commit. And slowly, without realizing it, they walk into something that's closing around them. What gets me isn't just the encirclement. It's the delay in awareness. The fact that inside that formation, surrounded by dust and noise and bodies, the Roman soldiers probably still felt like they were winning. Forward movement feels like victory. Pressure feels like dominance. And it's possible to feel both of those things right up until the moment you can't move anymore. That's the psychological shift I can't stop thinking about. You wake up believing this is the day you restore order. You march onto open ground at Cannae, thinking this is finally the battlefield that favors you. No fog, no surprise ambush, no mountains, just open terrain. And open terrain should favor Roman infantry. That is truly the belief. And that belief is powerful, because that belief can steady your nerves. And that belief can carry you into battle with confidence. But that belief can also blind you. Cannae is what happens when confidence meets manipulation. And I don't mean manipulation in a dramatic way. I mean calculated patience. Hannibal does not rush. He does not panic, and he lets Rome commit. He lets Rome do what Rome always does. And then you know what he does? He changes the shape. And here's the part that makes this more than just a tactical story. Rome doesn't collapse after Cannae. They lose tens of thousands of men, and they lose leadership, and they lose what should have been a war-ending confrontation. And they keep going. That tension between catastrophic defeat and long-term survival is what makes this battle feel bigger than the day itself. So today, I don't just want to walk through arrows on a map. I want to sit inside the mindset. I want to understand how confidence turns into compression, how momentum turns into suffocation, and how a system that built an empire can, in a single afternoon at Cannae, become its own trap. Because this show isn't just about forgotten battles. It's about patterns, and Cannae is a pattern. Strength without flexibility, momentum without awareness, and belief without adaptation. Without any of that, survival will collapse. So we're going to walk through this slowly. This is going to be a long haul, y'all, okay? And we're going to build the tension, and we're going to understand the maneuver. We're going to talk about what it felt like inside the formation. And then we're going to talk about why, centuries later, Cannae still shows up in military classrooms. Okay, that's enough with me talking, but let's step back into time. It's 216 BC, and Rome is not fragile. That's important to say clearly, because when we talk about Cannae, it's easy to accidentally frame Rome like they were desperate. They weren't. They were dominant. By this point, Rome had spent generations consolidating control across the Italian peninsula. They didn't just conquer territory, they absorbed it. They built alliances in Latin cities. They bound Italian states to them through treaties. They created a network where military obligation flowed toward Rome. When Rome raised an army, it wasn't drawing from a single city. It was drawing from an entire system. And that system had worked repeatedly. That's what makes Hannibal's presence in Italy so destabilizing, because what he did shouldn't have worked. In 218 BC, Hannibal marched from Spain through Gaul and then over the Alps into northern Italy. Over the Alps, with infantry and cavalry and elephants. Over the Alps. That alone is audacious, but audacity doesn't win war by itself. Survival does. And Hannibal survived the crossing. He descended into Italy with an army that had already endured something extraordinary. And then he fought. At the Trebia River, he lured Roman forces into crossing freezing water and crushed them. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed and annihilated another Roman army in one of the largest ambushes of the ancient world. 2 major Roman armies were destroyed on Roman soil within 2 years. Now imagine being a Roman citizen during that period. Rome isn't used to this. Rome expects setbacks. But Rome expects to recover quickly. What Hannibal is doing feels different. It feels humiliating. And humiliation changes political mood. After Lake Trasimene, Rome appoints a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus. Now, the word dictator in Roman terms doesn't mean what it means today. It was a temporary emergency appointment. 6 months of concentrated authority to stabilize a crisis. Quintus Fabius Maximus understands something important. Hannibal is strongest in open battle, so he refuses to give him open battle. He shadows Hannibal, harasses his supply lines, and avoids decisive confrontation. It's patient and it's calculated, and it earns Fabius a nickname, the Delayer. But patience is hard to sell politically. especially after embarrassment. Roman culture prized action. They prized decisiveness and they prized strength. The Fabian strategy feels defensive. It feels like avoidance, and avoidance feels like weakness. By 216 BC, political pressure builds. Enough delay, enough shadowing. If Hannibal wants a fight, give him one. And not a cautious one, a decisive one. Rome responds the way Rome knows how. They raise more troops, they lower age requirements, they draw deeper from their allied network. The army assembled near Cannae is massive, somewhere between 70 and 80,000 infantry, thousands of cavalry, and one of the largest Roman armies that have ever been fielded. That number matters because it reflects mindset. This is not cautious strategy. This is force as reassurance. This is Rome saying, we will overcome the problem. 2 consuls commanding the army, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Roman political structure required shared command to prevent concentrated power, but in battle, shared command can create inconsistency. Paulus was cautious and Varro was aggressive, and command alternated daily. On the day of Cannae, command rests with Varro, and Varro believes in decisive engagement. He believes that with enough infantry depth, Rome can crush Hannibal in open terrain. Across the field at Cannae, Hannibal's army is smaller, roughly 50,000, but numbers don't tell the full story. Hannibal's army is experienced, it has fought together, and it has survived the Alps. It has also already defeated Rome twice. And perhaps, probably the most important, it is flexible. Hannibal understands Roman psychology. He understands that after humiliation, Rome will crave a massive confrontation. He understands that Rome believes in forward pressure. He understands that Roman infantry will commit deeply once they feel momentum. So he chooses his battlefield carefully. Plains near Cannae beside Aufidus River are open and flat. No hills to hide, no forest for ambush, no fog to conceal movement like at Lake Trasimene. This is not surprise warfare, this is confrontation. Rome believes that open terrain favors them, because open terrain means Roman infantry can advance in disciplined formation. It means depth can be applied, it means pressure can be sustained. Hannibal sees the same terrain, but he doesn't see it as open space. He sees it as shape, and he intends to control that shape. The sun rises over Cannae, dust begins to stir, and standards lift. Tens of thousands of men prepare to collide. Rome believes that this is the day they restore inevitability. Hannibal believes this is the day he proves Rome can be guided. And neither side fully understands how brutal this will become. The morning at Cannae does not feel dramatic. There's no thunder, no storm rolling in, no cinematic moment of silence. Just heat. The kind of heat that settles early and refuses to lift. Southern Italy in August presses down on armor, on helmets, on lungs. Dust lies across the open plain near Aufidus River, dry and loose, waiting to be disturbed. And then it is. Tens of thousands of marching feet begin to churn into the air. The Roman army forms first, and when Rome forms at Cannae, it is enormous. Infantry stretch across the plain in dense ranks. Shields are overlapping and helmets are glinting. Standards rise above the mass like anchors in a sea of bodies. But what matters most isn't width, it's depth. Rome has stacked its infantry deeper than usual at Cannae. Instead of spreading out to match Hannibal's front, they compress inward. They want weight concentrated in the center. They want to punch through. The idea is simple. Break the center and collapse the line and end the war. Behind the front ranks stand more ranks, and behind them more. If you're a Roman soldier standing somewhere in that formation at Cannae, you probably feel reassured by the sheer number of men around you. There is safety in density, and there is confidence in mass. You can't even see the edges of your own army. Across the field, Hannibal arranges his forces differently. At the center, he places Iberian and Gallic infantry in a shallow inward curve, a convex bulge facing Rome. It looks exposed, and it looks like the point that will crack under pressure. Behind and slightly back on the wings stand the African infantry, disciplined, steady, and heavily armed. And on the flanks, the cavalry, especially the Numidian horsemen, light, fast, and unpredictable. But Rome is not focused on cavalry. Rome is focused on that center. The order to advance moves across the Roman line at Cannae. It begins as a steady forward movement. Shields up, spears angled, measured steps across the dust. Then the distance closes. Then the sound changes. Wood striking wood, iron ringing against iron, shouts in multiple languages. The Roman front line collides with the Carthaginian center. And at first, it works. The Carthaginian center gives ground. Slowly, deliberately, but from inside the Roman ranks, retreat looks like weakness. The enemy is falling back. That feels like proof. The Romans push harder. Men in the rear press forward to sustain the advance. The formation tightens. Shields press into backs. Arms have less room to swing. Breathing becomes more labored. Not from fear yet, but from proximity. The Carthaginian center continues to retreat, step by controlled step, absorbing the pressure, and as it retreats, the shape changes. The outward bulge flattens, then begins to curve inward. From above, it would be obvious. From within the Roman formation at Cannae, it is invisible. You don't see geometry, you feel forward motion, you feel momentum, and momentum feels like inevitability. The deeper the Romans push, the more compressed they become. The narrower the space ahead. They are advancing into a pocket. On the flanks, the African infantry begin to pivot inward, not rushing, not breaking formation, but pivoting. Their movement is disciplined and controlled. They wait until the Roman advance has fully committed into the center. Then they close. At the same time, the Carthaginian cavalry engages the Roman cavalry on both wings. The Roman horsemen struggle. They are pushed back. Gradually, they lose cohesion, and then they break. Once the Roman cavalry collapses, the Carthaginian cavalry does not chase far. They turn. They sweep behind the Roman infantry. And this is the moment everything shifts. The Roman soldiers at the front of Cannae are still pushing forward, believing they are winning. But the flanks are tightening. The rear is closing. The African infantry strike inward from both sides. The Carthaginian cavalry presses from behind, and suddenly, the Roman army at Cannae is surrounded. Absolutely surrounded completely. At first, there is confusion. The men try to turn. There is nowhere to turn. You cannot see the full field from inside a dense infantry block. You see the back of the man in front of you. You feel shields pressing into your sides, then pressing into your back. The space shrinks. The air thickens with dust. Heat builds inside armor. Breathing becomes harder. Those at the edges are cut down first. Those in the center are trapped. They cannot advance. They cannot retreat. They can barely lift their swords. The depth that felt reassuring now becomes crushing. Some soldiers suffocate before they are even struck. Others are pinned by the weight of bodies pressing in from every direction. The Carthaginians do not rush wildly. They compress gradually and relentlessly. The ring tightens around the Roman mass at Cannae. Hours pass under the August sun, under dust and heat and noise. This is not a swift collapse. It is suffocation. It is reduction. By the end of the day, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lie dead in the plain of Cannae. Lucius Aemilius Paulus falls on the field. Gaius Terentius Varro escapes with a small remnant of cavalry. The army that Rome believed would restore dominance at Cannae is gone, not scattered, destroyed. And the silence after that kind of slaughter is heavy. When the killing finally stops at Cannae, the battlefield does not look like victory. It looks like exhaustion. It looks like collapse. The Roman formation, once packed so tightly it felt immovable, now lies in layers. Bodies pressed together where compression was worst. Broken shields scattered across churned dust. Standards fallen into the dirt. The depth that Rome believed would guarantee dominance at Cannae magnified the scale of loss. Ancient sources give staggering numbers. Some claim more than 70,000 Roman soldiers died that day. Modern historians often argue for slightly lower figures, perhaps 50 to 60,000. Even at the low end, it is catastrophic. In a single afternoon, one of the two consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, is dead. Thousands of Roman officers are dead. Entire legions effectively erased. Gaius Terentius Varro survives, retreating with fragments of cavalry and scattered infantry. News does not travel instantly. It spreads through survivors, through riders, through rumors, but the message is clear. The army is gone, surrounded, destroyed. Inside Rome, shock ripples through the city. This is not just a battlefield loss. After Cannae, the Republic has no large field army left in Italy. For the first time, the idea that Hannibal might march directly on Rome feels real. And this is one of the most debated decisions in ancient military history. Hannibal does not march on Rome after Cannae. Why? Well, there are theories. He lacked heavy siege equipment necessary to assault fortified walls. His army, though victorious, was exhausted and bloodied. He may have calculated that Rome's walls, manpower reserves, and political will made a direct siege too costly. Or perhaps, and this is important, his strategy was never about physically occupying Rome. It was about breaking Rome's alliances. Cannae was meant to fracture the Republic from within. If Rome's Italian allies abandoned them after such a catastrophic defeat, Rome would weaken without needing to be stormed. And to some extent, that begins to happen. Several southern Italian cities shift allegiance after Cannae. Capua defects, other communities reconsider their loyalty. The myth of Roman invincibility has cracked, but it does not shatter. Inside Rome, something remarkable happens. There is panic, there is grief, there are families who will never see sons return. But the Senate refuses to negotiate, they refuse to surrender, and they refuse to ransom captured soldiers. That last decision is brutal. Thousands of Roman prisoners remain in Hannibal's custody. The Senate declines to pay for their release. Why? Because ransoming them could signal weakness, and weakness invites collapse. Instead, Rome raises new legions. They lower age requirements again. They draw from reserves that had not yet been tapped. Even enslaved men are armed and promised freedom in exchange for military service. The Republic mobilizes every remaining source. This is not denial, this is adaptation. Strategically, Rome learns. They avoid direct confrontation with Hannibal in the years that follow. The Fabian strategy, first associated with Quintus Fabius Maximus, becomes reality again. Shadowing, harassment, avoiding pitched battle. Time becomes a weapon. Hannibal remains in Italy for years after Cannae, undefeated in open battle, but increasingly isolated. Rome rebuilds faster than expected, and Rome stabilizes alliances, and Rome slowly regains initiative. Eventually, the theater shifts. Under Scipio Africanus, Rome carries the war into North Africa. In 202 BC, at Zama, Hannibal is defeated. Cannae does not end Rome, it forces Rome to evolve. And that may be the most important consequence of all, because Cannae becomes more than a battlefield. It becomes a lesson, a study in encirclement, a demonstration that numerically superiority can be neutralized by flexibility. That rigid strength can be shaped and turned inward. For centuries, military leaders have studied Cannae, not just for the maneuver, but for the scale, for the psychological manipulation, and for the geometry. But what makes it endure is not just tactical brilliance. It is the fact that even after a day like Cannae, Rome does not disappear. Catastrophic defeat does not automatically equal strategic collapse. That tension between annihilation and survival is what gives Cannae its weight. Cannae does not stay in 216 BC. It doesn't remain a story confined to ancient Rome and Carthage. It becomes a blueprint. For centuries, military thinkers have returned to Cannae not because of the body count, but because of the structure. What happened at Cannae is what later strategists would call a double envelopment. Instead of attacking an enemy head-on and trying to grind them down, Hannibal allows the enemy to advance, absorbs the pressure, and then closes the flanks and rear. It's not just victory, it's annihilation, and that difference matters. Most battles in history end with retreat. One side breaks and runs, the other side pursues. The losing army survives in some form. At Cannae, the Roman army does not retreat. It is encircled, it is compressed, and it is destroyed in its place. That kind of total battlefield annihilation is rare, and rare things get studied. In the 19th century, European military theorists began analyzing ancient campaigns with renewed intensity. Among them was Alfred von Schlieffen. Schlieffen studied Cannae obsessively. He saw in it the purest example of operational encirclement. He believed that modern armies, with railways and mass mobilization, could replicate something similar on a continental scale. The Schlieffen Plan, which was developed before the First World War, was heavily influenced by the idea of creating a modern Cannae, a massive sweeping movement designed to envelop an enemy army before it could fully mobilize. Now, history shows us that reality is never as clean as theory, but the fact that a battle from 216 BC influenced strategic planning in 1914 tells you something. Cannae also becomes shorthand in military language. To say an army suffered a Cannae means it was not just defeated, it was surrounded and annihilated. That language carries weight because annihilation is psychologically powerful. It doesn't just defeat an opponent, it erases their immediate capacity to resist. Modern military academies still study Cannae, not because we fight with shields and spears anymore, but because the principles remain relevant. Fix the enemy in place, shape their movement, exploit rigidity, control geometry. And perhaps most importantly, understand your opponent's mindset. Hannibal didn't just arrange troops well at Cannae, he understood Roman psychology. He understood that they would commit deeply once they felt momentum. And he built his formation around that expectation. That combination, tactical design plus psychological prediction, is why Cannae endures in doctrine. But there is something else. Cannae is also studied because it represents the extreme, total battlefield destruction. It's the kind of outcome generals fantasize about, decisive, clean, and final. Yet, history reminds us something important. Even a Cannae does not automatically end a war. Rome survived, Rome adapted, and Rome eventually won. That tension between annihilation on the field and resilience beyond the field is part of why classrooms still return to Cannae. It's not just a story about brilliance, it's a case study in limits. The limits of victory, the limits of destruction, and the limits of assuming one battle defines everything. Cannae becomes a mirror. It becomes a mirror for commanders, for strategists, for students of war. It asks a question that still matters. Is destruction enough, or does endurance win in the long run? And that's why, centuries later, we're still talking about a hot August day near the Aufidus River. I keep thinking about how easy it is to admire Cannae from a distance. It's easy to look at it like it's a chessboard, like clean lines, clean strategy, clean victory. But nothing about that day was clean. It was suffocating, and it was loud, and it was chaotic. And most of the men inside that Roman formation at Cannae probably never understood the full shape of what was happening around them. That's the part that stays with me, not the brilliance, but the delay in awareness. The moment when forward movement stops feeling like progress. The moment when confidence turns into confusion and maybe even denial. Because when you've built your identity around strength, around inevitability, it's hard to recognize when the ground has shifted under you. Rome believed in pressure, in discipline, in depth, in pushing forward together, and those things had worked for years. So why wouldn't they work again? That's the dangerous comfort of success. It builds certainty, and certainty can make you predictable. But here's the twist that makes Cannae more than just a cautionary tale. Rome doesn't disappear, they don't dissolve, and they don't accept that one catastrophic day defines them. They absorb it, and they adjust, and they fight differently. They refused to let annihilation become identity. I think that's the part that matters more than the encirclement, because annihilation is dramatic. It's easy to focus on, and it's easy to teach, and it's easy to diagram. But endurance is quieter, endurance is harder to measure, and endurance is harder to illustrate, and endurance is harder to romanticize. Cannae shows us what brilliance looks like on the battlefield, but it also shows us what stubborn resilience looks like afterward. And maybe that's why it's still studied. Not just because Hannibal executed a near-perfect envelopment, but because even near-perfect destruction didn't end the story. History is full of moments that look final, moments that look decisive, and moments that look like there's no coming back from this. Cannae should have been one of those moments, and it wasn't. So when I think about this battle now, I don't see a trap closing. I see a system forced to evolve. I see what happens when strength meets flexibility, and I see the uncomfortable truth that even overwhelming victory doesn't guarantee long-term success. Cannae is remembered for encirclement, but I think it lingers because it refuses to stay simple. It's brilliance and brutality, collapse and survival, destruction and adaptation, all in one day. And maybe that's why we're still talking about it. Not because it was the bloodiest, not because it was the most dramatic, but because it forces us to ask, what happens after the worst day? Till next time, I will see you on the front lines.